Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. He arrived in Washington in 1983, a young congressman from downstate Illinois, and helped Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill pull Social Security back from the brink. 43 years later, Dick Durbin is the second-ranking Democrat in the U.S. Senate, longest-serving party whip in the chamber's history, and he's preparing to leave it all behind, having announced he will not seek another term. But he's not gone yet, and the kid from East St. Louis still has things to say about Social Security, once again on the edge, about a war with Iran, and about a Justice Department he says he no longer recognizes.
Mr. Blanche is President Trump's former personal lawyer, and in his role as Deputy Attorney General and Acting Attorney General, he has continued to play that role. Throughout his tenure at the Justice Department, Mr. Blanche has used the department as a shield to protect the president and his MAGA allies, and a sword to attack the president's opponents.
There's a bigger question under this whole conversation, and it's older than any one senator. What does Congress still control? Dick Durbin is spending his final days on 3 fights that test exactly that. Whether Congress can summon the will to save Social Security, whether it still decides when the nation goes to war, and whether the Justice Department answers to the law or to a lone president. He doesn't have the votes to win any of these fights, but he made his case anyway. Our conversation with Senator Dick Durbin. Senator, you and 3 colleagues put out a statement saying that Congress has no shortage of ideas on Social Security. What's lacking is the will. So let's test the will. Would you raise the payroll tax cap above $184,500, or would you raise the retirement age?
Listen, I went through this before. In 1983, as a member of the House, with the Social Security system facing bankruptcy, imminent bankruptcy, we worked on a bipartisan basis with Republican President Ronald Reagan and Democrat leaders like Tip O'Neill. We put together a change in Social Security that brought 50 years of solvency. Now we're reached the point where 2032 or 2033, it's going to be a cut in benefits. What I have to say to you is it's a mistake to start picking off 1 or 2 controversial things to kill this effort. We've got to save Social Security and make it stronger for another 50 years so that your parents and your grandparents and those that follow them can count on Social Security for the future.
It's interesting that some senators are telling seniors to brace for a 22% cut 6 years out. That's maybe $450 a month off the kitchen table, all while the same government finds the money to invade Iran for more than 100 days. So to a guy in Millstadt or O'Fallon, why does Washington always have money for war and a deadline for grandma?
It's a question that should be asked by every American. How can we afford to invade or attack Iran when they were not attacking us, spend billions of dollars, lose American lives in the process, and not find the money for basics that American families need, including Social Security for retirement, including daycare and child care that's so critical for people who want to go to work with peace of mind? The priorities reflect the president. This president has made it clear that when it comes to helping families meet their debt requirements, that's not on his agenda.
On the deal itself and the details, you're arguing President Trump may have started the war with Iran only to land roughly where the Obama deal already was, the JCPOA. If we set the politics aside, is your objection that the deal itself is bad or that Trump gets credit for it?
We don't know the deal at this point. I was just handed 10 minutes ago the basic memorandum of understanding, and it's the beginning of serious negotiations over the next 60 days. The first item on here says that the United States will put an end to the naval blockade of the Straits of Hormuz. Hooray. We never should have started that blockade. We never should have made the Straits of Hormuz the issue that it is today. But our attack on Iran has done that. Do the American people know it? You bet your damn betcha. When they go out shopping or take their kids to school, they see the signs at the gas pumps. They know how much money they're pumping into that gas tank every single week. I don't know how long it will take us to recover from what the president's done in Iran with the price of gasoline, but that has to be our first priority.
On your scale of victory and defeat, where does your arrow point?
At this point, I just want this to end well. It started poorly. The president refused to follow the Constitution, which requires Congress to declare war. What the Constitution actually says is the American people, through their members of Congress, will declare war. The president ignored it and went on his own. When President Obama was doing the same negotiation, he had countries from around the world, including China and Russia, backing up our efforts. Trump decided to do it by himself. So I want this to come to an end. It was a folly. It was a terrible loss of American life and a terrible expenditure of billions of dollars that should have been spent in the United States.
And Senator, just a year ago, you voted no on Todd Blanche for Deputy Attorney General. He was confirmed anyway. everything you've cataloged since, what you've called that $1.8 billion slush fund, the Comey indictment, the Maxwell transfer, it all happened on the watch that you weren't able to stop. So when he comes before the Judiciary Committee again this time, do you have a single Republican vote in hand to block him, or is this another no vote that you'll lose?
I just don't know about the Republicans. They're afraid to cross this president. Very few of them have objected to any of his nominees. Mr. Blanche is entitled to a fair hearing. I get to ask my questions as others will, and then I'll decide my vote on his position of Attorney General. But let me tell you this. I want an Attorney General loyal to the Constitution of the United States more than any single president.
For years, Republicans said the Biden Justice Department was weaponized against Trump. Now you're saying Trump's DOJ is weaponized against his enemies. From the cheap seats, for a lot of our viewers, I think it looks to folks across the country like whoever holds the building holds the gun. Why is your weaponization the real one and theirs the fake one?
I can make all sorts of explanations as to the cases brought against Donald Trump between his first and second term, and jury decisions over and over again about his guilt. But I want to put that behind us. We have got to stop using the prosecution powers of the Department of Justice for political purposes. Both parties have to do it. Right now we're seeing it, the Republicans doing it at their worst.
Senator, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
She's a retired school teacher who has never held office, betting $250,000 of her own money on a long-shot bid for Congress. Joan Van Drost taught the Constitution to fifth graders in Clayton and Parkway. Now she'd like to defend it in Washington if Democratic primary voters send her there. But first she has to get out of a crowded Democratic primary, and that's where we began. Joan Van Drost joins us now on the record. Good to have you with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mark. Yeah.
Let's talk about what you would do if you got to Capitol Hill.
Yes.
Here's a line directly from your website. Take back Section 8 housing and make it beautiful. And it's one thing to get bummed out by a boarded up window, but it's another thing to fix the system. I wonder if you can tell me precisely what you're aiming for. Take it back from whom?
Well, right now, I think
how?
it's...
I'm sure you're talking about more than a throw pillow and crown molding here.
Right. I mean, when we build things, we can build them as they're ugly or we can build them as they're beautiful. Let's take one apartment complex in Ferguson. When the person who bought it, he filled in the pools and he, cut down the basketball courts and didn't work to keep that up. And, people are getting paid by the government to have housing for people. And it shouldn't be as big of a profit center as it is. They need to take care of the places and they need to be livable.
But is curb appeal really the problem with Section 8?
I think it's a mixture of both. People are elevated when they live in a place that is lovely, right? But also it needs to have the utilities taken care of. It needs to have, the walls should not be the ceiling should not be leaking. You've seen some of these homes that have been on TV. They're unlivable. They're full of mold and rats and mice. And we need to have quality housing for people. And it needs to be not a way of life, but a stepping stone to better stability in the job market.
Would you have voted for the housing bill Ann Wagner just voted for?
Oh, you're talking about the one that Donald Trump is not going to sign?
He has threatened that.
Right. Yes, absolutely, yeah. We've got to get our housing equalized. We've got to have people have an entryway into the market. Right now, the average age is 40 years old before people can buy a home.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
You've coined yourself a constitutional Democrat?
Yes.
So to voters in Sullivan?
Yes.
Or in Union?
Yeah.
What does that mean for how you'll vote when your party asks you to outlaw their favorite rifle?
I think that it's not so extreme as that, right? We're not talking about outlawing their favorite rifle.
Would you support an assault weapons ban?
Yeah, I do. We don't need
and how
weapons
you define
of
that
war.
Assault rifle?
We don't have. I don't think we should have weapons of war on the street.
Well, a handgun can be a weapon of war. How do you define that?
Well, hopefully we don't have single voters, issues that are just single voter. And there are other issues that they would support me on.
That sounds like a little bit of a dodge on the specifics.
Yeah.
If you're calling for an assault weapons ban, do you owe voters an explanation for what that exactly is?
Yeah, I would have to really look into it and decide, what that would be. But I also listen to the people and would hear how they use it, I mean, hunting rifles are really important. Right, but when you've got bullets that can just decimate an entire classroom, or in Sandy Hook, and we aren't vetting how we use those and who has those, I think that creates potential tragedy.
I want to read you again from your own platform. You call
Okay.
for a comprehensive plan to move the country toward Medicare for all.
Yes.
Those two ideas appear to be at war with one another. There's not one Republican in Congress who supports Medicare for all. So which is the real promise? The bipartisanship or the single-payer system? Because I'm afraid you can't offer voters both.
Well, hopefully, with this midterm election, we'll be changing the composition with that. And the second thing I want to be on is the Problem Solvers Committee. So hopefully, through that caucus, and we can have conversation about health care. And I do seem to see a shift as I go around and I speak with people throughout the community. There is more openness to Medicare for all because people are traumatized by what's happening with their health care. Medical bankruptcies are the #1 cause of bankruptcies, 40%. There are people that are choosing between their child dying of cancer and losing their home, and the couple that I heard the story from, they lost both.
On the numbers, the most cited estimate puts Medicare for all north of $30 trillion over 10 years.
Yes.
In a district Donald Trump carried, who pays for that and how?
Well, right now the taxpayers are paying for Medicare, right? We pay for that.
Well,
But,
we're talking about $30 trillion
Right.
more than what
Right.
we're currently paying.
Yeah. Well, I think it needs to be examined how we go about that, but there's a book called Medicare for All that has been written, and there's also Ed Weisbart, Physicians for a National Health Care Plan, and he has talked about the estimates with the Congressional Budget Office and how we can pay for that. And I think,
And the answer is?
well, we've got to do some taxation, but it would essentially be people earning more than $400,000 a year.
The Biden plan.
And after, under $400,000 a year, you would save money. For example, I put mine into the Medicare calculator, and I would save $12,000 a year. I am in a plan with the school district, and I'm still paying $800 a month for my health care. And that is in addition to, being in a large pool in a school district to get it discounted.
Name one thing, one vote, one fight that you would deliver in Congress that Fred Wellman would not.
Well, with Medicare for All, for example, that is not what he wants to do. The public option is his interest. And I just feel that's another Band-Aid. We can see how that's fallen apart with the ACA. I also am focused on universal health care. Universal pre-K. Because right now we have two things going on. We are falling behind in education, but we know with brain development, it really matters that we catch kids early. So I think that's an important thing. And then you also have an affordability factor. People can't afford to have kids. My own boys, it's $24,000 for each of them to have their kids in school, and to have two would be, it's $24,000, it'd be $40,000. So it's unaffordable to have kids. And I think that's probably one thing that we are different on.
Very interesting. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
We're back in a moment. The stage was set. The bill had passed, bipartisan too, kind of rare these days. It doesn't spend new money. Instead, it cuts federal red tape to make building cheaper. It expands FHA-backed home mortgages for homes that cost less than $100,000. Those are the cheap kind of houses that banks usually don't finance. A big problem in North St. Louis especially. It also bars Wall Street firms that own 350 homes or more from gobbling up more of them. House Republican Ann Wagner called it generational. Republican senators like Josh Hawley and Eric Schmidt voted for it too. Then the president canceled the bill signing party. Says he won't sign it. Not until Congress passes an unrelated bill on proof of citizenship voting. So a big generational measure Ann Wagner is selling to St. Louis families sits on a shelf, held there not by the other side, but by her own party. Here's a local thread in the bigger fight. The same fight over who gets to vote is now being led by Missouri's own Attorney General. Catherine Hanaway built her career in St. Louis courtrooms, first as the region's U.S. attorney, now as Missouri's first woman Attorney General. This week, she stepped onto the national stage, leading 23 states in defense of Indiana's voter ID law, a measure a federal judge just blocked as unconstitutional. She calls photo ID at the ballot box common sense. Opponents call it a barrier, looking for fraud that investigators keep failing to find. She says it protects election integrity. But here's the part to watch. Court after court, including reviews right here in Missouri, has found no evidence of the widespread fraud those laws are sold to stop. So the question isn't whether showing ID sounds reasonable, it's whether it fixes a problem anyone has actually proven exists. And consider this, our Midwestern neighbors, just a few state lines east, A fellow Republican there reached the opposite conclusion. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine this week vetoed a bill to extend photo ID rules to mail voting. He calls it unnecessary in a state he says already runs clean elections. His own party's lawmakers may try to override him. Back in Missouri in February, Denny Hoskins sat in front of a House committee and drew a big, bright red line. He said Missourians' private information, the Secretary of State said, would not go to Washington, not without a court order. He repeated himself over again. But last month, that line got a little shakier. Hoskins quietly sent the driver's license numbers and the birth years of Missouri voters to the federal Justice Department without a court order, all for a national fraud database a judge has since declared unlawful. Hoskins blames lawmakers. He says they wouldn't give him the subpoena power he wanted. The voters whose data he shipped over to D.C. were not asked. Hoskins says his office found 1,000 people in voter registration lists that his office could not confirm were American citizens. His press release did not allege any of those people ever cast a ballot, which would be against the law. 4 years to the day after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the divide still runs right through this region. In Illinois, Governor Pritzker signed a law that this week would shield the medical records of people who travel there for an abortion. Illinois has become one of the nation's busiest destinations for that treatment. Missouri is the more tangled story. Voters made abortion a constitutional right here in 2024. And just last week, a court threw out all the old bans and barriers, including the rules that had kept the abortion pill out of reach. As of Monday, both the procedure and the medication are available again for the first time in years. But the network is threadbare, essentially a single Planned Parenthood carrying the entire state. The Attorney General is appealing to a Supreme Court that reinstated the ban once before, and in November, Missourians vote on whether to outlaw it all over again. Back in Illinois, Republican Darren Bailey is trying to become the first Republican to win statewide there in a dozen years. He built a political career early on, promising to ban abortion. He now calls the whole issue overblown, a culture war. And in Illinois, voters will have a serious independent on the ballot for governor this November. Colin Corbett qualified with more than 27,000 signatures, beating back a challenge from Republican Darren Bailey, who dropped his objection to the third-party candidate appearing on the ballot. Corbett, only the third independent candidate for governor in that state in 86 years. The Supreme Court just handed President Trump another immigration win and stripped their colleagues in robes of any power to second-guess it from the bench in the future. But there's one line in the dissent the majority wouldn't put in print. We'll check the record next. It's called temporary protected status. Temporary. The idea is when your country becomes a killing ground, like an earthquake, a civil war, the gangs taking the streets, America holds the door until it's safe for you to go home. It's a sentiment not far from that old tagline, "We'll leave the light on for you." The recent examples are pretty grim. Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, Syria in 2012 as Assad turned his guns and worse on his own people. Now the Supreme Court is telling more than 350,000 of those people the door is closing. And going forward, no judge can even ask where we keep the key. Temporary, the Trump administration says, so let's check the record. The law required one conversation before shipping those vulnerable visitors back home and slamming the door behind them. Ask the government whether it's safe to send those people back. The record shows they did not ask that in this case. They asked the State Department whether there were any foreign policy concerns. At that same time, the State Department was warning American travelers no part of Syria was safe from violence, and for Haiti, it meant kidnapping, crime, and terror. Court filings say 4 Haitian women deported in February were later found beheaded in a river. In the judgment of the majority, the Supreme Court found the president's words about Haitians were, quote, not overtly racial, and chose not to print them. The dissent printed them, though. You might remember those words: the eating of pets, the poisoning the blood. Norway, please, not Haiti. Justice Kagan, in the dry language of the bench, reminded the majority that judges are, quote, not required to exhibit a naivete from which ordinary citizens are free. Translation, just because he didn't print his words, don't pretend the rest of us don't remember what he said. There's that poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty, "Give me you're tired, you're poor." Emma Lazarus called her the mother of exiles, lifting her lamp beside the golden door. We'll leave the light on for you. It's flickering these days. Good luck finding the key. That's our show. Until next time, we're off the record.